Songs of Survival. Anya awoke not to the comforting rhythm of the hive's bioluminescence, but to the acrid tang of smoke and the panicked chirps of unseen Acti hatchlings. Xylo's presence, usually a calming hum at the edge of her mind, pulsed with a frantic urgency. Scrambling to her feet, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she fought against the disorientation of the smoke-filled chamber. The earthen walls, usually aglow with a soft blue luminescence, were shrouded in an unnatural darkness. Outside, the symphony of clicks and skittering footsteps that had become her lullaby these past weeks had been replaced by a terrifying new chorus. Harsh screeches that sent shivers down her spine and ear-splitting blasts that shook the very foundations of the hive. Xylo? Her voice, raw with fear, echoed in the confined space. Her telepathic call was met with a burst of static and a message laced with raw terror. Seek safety. Dissidents attack. Before she could even process the words, a young Acti worker, Linnea, scuttled through the makeshift doorway, her usually gleaming chitinous plates dull with fear. Her multifaceted eyes, usually sparkling with a curious intelligence, were wide with terror. They breached the eastern tunnels. Linnea rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Mother says, run. The human must flee. Anya's stomach clenched. And you? What of your mother? Linnea's multifaceted eyes dimmed, their luminous glow flickering like a dying candle flame. She stays to defend. Her voice was scarcely louder than a sigh. Human slow. You can reach the surface, Warren. There was no time to process the enormity of Linnea's sacrifice of a mother, sending her child away while she faced certain death. Anya snatched up her satchel, the weight of her few belongings a cruel counterpoint to the impossible choice before her. They hurried through the hive, the air growing hotter and thicker with the choking smoke. The Acti they encountered were a blur of motion. Warriors, hardened and immense, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming a deep emerald in the dim light, rushed past, their sonic resonators, intricate, crystal-like structures mounted on their backs, humming with low power. Healers, their forms smaller and less imposing, with bioluminescent markings pulsing a calming blue, carried injured comrades with grim efficiency. At a fork in the tunnel, Linnea gripped Anya's arm, her delicate limbs trembling with exertion. This way, she gasped, pointing with a segmented limb towards a narrow passage. Surface is close. Go. Then, with a heartbreaking display of courage that belied her small stature, she turned back towards the chaos, her luminous form receding into the smoke-filled darkness. Anya stumbled on, her own fear a distant echo compared to the guilt and terror surging through her. These creatures, so alien just weeks before, had welcomed her with a trust she and her people had so thoroughly shattered. The exit appeared as a sliver of pale light, and Anya burst into the open, gasping. The twilight landscape had been transformed. Sections of the once lush forest glowed with an angry orange, their bioluminescent flora either extinguished or blazing in a riot of unnatural color. The air itself hummed with a low tremor, the aftershock of a recent sonic blast. Anya's gaze swept across the scene, taking in the horrifying tableau. Acti bodies, their majestic forms broken and still, littered the ground. Some she recognized, gentle elders who had patiently endured her clumsy attempts at communication, their multifaceted eyes dimmed forever. Others were heartbreakingly small, hatchlings barely past the larval stage, their chitinous shells cracked and lifeless. The image of Elias flashed through her mind, grim, weathered, haunted by the prospect of exactly this scenario. He would blame her, and perhaps rightfully so. Her hope, her belief in diplomacy, had led them to this. A piercing screech tore her attention away. Atop a nearby ridge, a group of Acti warriors, their chitin a deep obsidian black, their resonators pulsating with an ominous red glow, battled desperately against a tide of attackers. These dissidents, a twisted reflection of the Acti she knew, were a chilling sight. Their chitin was marred with crude cybernetic implants, their resonators modified into grotesque parodies of their natural form, crackling with raw power. Then, she saw her. Xylo, her immense form a beacon of defiance amidst the carnage, directed the defense with a calm born of ages. Shock turned to a surge of desperate hope. Xylo wasn't lost. If Anya could just reach her. A roar erupted from the forest, a sound of metal tearing that sent a primal chill down her spine. From the treeline emerged an abomination. It moved on 6 articulated legs, its form a grotesque parody of an Acti, but amplified in size and brutality. Crude armor plates covered its chitin, and where its resonators should have been were weapon pods gleaming with wicked intent. A cry of revulsion tore from Anya's throat. The dissidents parted, giving the hulking machine a clear path toward Xylo. "No!" she screamed, the word lost in the cacophony of battle. Anya ran, scrambling up the rocky ridge, heedless of danger or the futility of her actions. She reached the embattled group just as the war machine unleashed a deafening sonic blast, shattering the earth. Xylo, her magnificent form shimmering with the strain of deflecting the attack, held her ground. But her resonators glowed dangerously bright, their intricate structure threatening to crack under the overwhelming force. Anya lunged forward, not in some brave act of defiance, but driven by instinct. She interposed herself between Xylo and the dissident machine, the telepathic connection to the Acti elder surging with overwhelming intensity. "Show them," she projected at Xylo with every ounce of her being. "Show them what they're fighting for." Xylo's answering pulse was a wave of mingled desperation and fragile hope. Then, in a move impossible for her massive form, the elder did the unexpected. She dropped her resonators. The silence was deafening. The dissident machine stilled, its glowing sensor arrays flickering in confusion. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stutter. Then, from behind Xylo, the defenders charged, not with weapons raised, but with outstretched limbs, offering themselves in a gesture even the cold logic of the war machine couldn't misinterpret. One by one, they fell, the dissidents cutting them down with brutal efficiency. But their sacrifice was buying time. Anya, shaking, dropped to her knees before Xylo, whispering apologies, explanations, please. Xylo extended a chitinous limb, not in aggression, but in a touch so gentle it made Anya sob. From the elder came a surge of imagery that left her breathless. Memories. Not the alien horrors she'd feared, but a world in flames, echoing screams, and the bitter taste of their own near extinction. This dissident faction was born not from malice, but desperation, a twisted echo of what humanity had brought to Kepler 186F. Anya looked up, meeting Xylo's multifaceted gaze. "I can still help," she said, her voice hoarse. "Let me reach them, like I reached you. There's still time." The war machine surged forward, but Xylo held firm. The bioluminescent nodes across her body pulsed a final time, and a wave of dissonant energy, raw yet filled with a strange and ancient lament, washed over them. Not a weapon, but a language, a desperate gamble on a sliver of hope still lingering in a battle seemingly already lost. Dawn bled a sickly gray light over the prefab structures of New Eden. The usual rhythm of the colony, the whirring water recyclers, the chatter of morning work shifts, was absent. Instead, a low throb pulsed beneath the silence, a constant reminder of the new fear gripping them. Anya's footsteps echoed too loudly in the ration line. Faces once met with warm smiles now turned away. A child, clutching a withered, once luminescent bloom, burst into tears as she passed. The child's mother snatched her away, whispering harshly, "Don't trust the bug lover. It's her doing, all of it." The makeshift lab was a sanctuary violated. Equipment jostled, data logs rifled through. A streak of something foul marred a plant sample, not accidental, but a calculated insult. "Sabotage," she choked out, the word echoing in the empty space. Had it truly come to this? Her fingers traced the readings from the night before, the relentless sonic pulse mirrored by the decaying flora. A knock? Not Elias's familiar stride, but a furtive hesitation, startled her. Dr. Petrova? Maya, a recent arrival, lingered in the doorway, her face a mask of uncertainty. The commander, he requests your presence. In the plaza. Not a request, Anya realized, but a summons. The central plaza buzzed with a fearful energy. Elias stood on a makeshift platform, the lines etched on his face deeper in the harsh light. Theron held court nearby, casting venomous glances their way, his voice a hiss cutting through the crowd. Told you, those bug lovers want us weak? Opening the gates. A knot tightened in Anya's chest. Elias usually weathered dissent with stoic authority, but now there was a flicker of despair in his eyes. His voice strained as he tried to be heard. We must remain calm. Trust in our... His words were cut off by a gasp from the crowd. Anya followed their gaze and felt the blood drain from her face. Her beloved stuffed rabbit, faded and worn, lay trampled in the dirt. Its button eye gleamed like a grotesque accusation. Across the plaza, Theron's smirk was a predator's baring of teeth. Lies and children's toys, he sneered. Is that all your precious aliens have taught you, Dr. Petrova? The accusation ignited the tinderbox of fear. Shouts erupted, a rising tide of anger and suspicion crashing against her. Elias tried to restore order, but his voice was drowned out. Even in the chaos, she saw it, a flicker of doubt clouding his gaze, the ghost of an old fear she couldn't name. Then, the ground trembled. The low thrum intensified into a bone-jarring vibration. The plaza fell silent. All eyes turned, as one, towards the ridge. The bioluminescent flora flickered wildly, then plunged the settlement into an unnatural gloom. A collective gasp, a ragged chorus of terror, reverberated through the crowd. On the ridge, a monstrous silhouette dwarfed anything Anya had yet seen. An Acti form, warped and amplified to grotesque proportions, pulsed with an ominous light. Twin resonators, twisted into nightmarish parodies of their natural forms, gleamed like baleful stars. Anya's breath caught. It was the embodiment of their darkest fears, made horrifyingly real. Behold! Theron's voice, amplified by manic triumph, boomed across the valley. The truth the bug lover tried to hide. They lied to us, and now they come to claim their prize. The colonists swayed, eyes wide with a terror Anya knew too well. She searched for Elias, the man always ready with a plan, a command. But she saw only a reflection of her own horror mirrored in his face. Gather your belongings. His voice was hoarse, barely audible above the low thrum. Prepare the shelters. The time we hoped for, it's no longer coming. It was the final, crushing blow. Even if they survived the sonic onslaught to come, New Eden was already lost. The air in the cramped command center crackled with a tension that clung to the skin like the ever-present hum from the valley below. Maps marred with grim projections lined the walls, ration tallies a stark accounting beside them. The scent of recycled air and stale fear was almost tangible. Elias hunched over a makeshift desk littered with charts, his usually stoic face etched with a weariness that spoke of horrors unseen. Anya stood before him, her earlier eagerness replaced by a taut determination bordering on desperation. The shelters won't hold them all, she said, her voice hoarse but carrying an undercurrent of scientific fervor. Even with extended shifts, rotations, the numbers aren't on our side. She gestured to a spiking sonic projection. We need to consider the resonance factor. If I could modulate a feedback loop, target their resonators? Elias rubbed his eyes, the gesture exposing a haunted vulnerability. For a fleeting moment, it wasn't maps or charts that flickered through his mind, but a cityscape ablaze, the screams of the dying a monstrous chorus he could never escape. Hypotheticals won't save lives, Dr. Petrova. What you suggest is... He hesitated, searching for a word softer than suicide mission, but finding none. Theron, a vulture perched on the edge of their despair, scoffed. Hypotheticals? No, it's treason. More of her bug-lover lies, meant to weaken us, leave us vulnerable. His gaze darted around the room, seeking a foothold in the fear reflected back at him. The accusation stung, but Anya's focus didn't waver. Their resonators aren't merely weapons. I've analyzed the frequencies, the harmonics. It's communication, distorted, amplified. Her words tumbled out in a jumble of technical jargon, a frantic plea rooted in knowledge they desperately needed. A flicker of unease, something akin to revulsion, crossed Theron's face before he schooled his features into a mask of righteous anger. He was a man fueled by fear, and the depths of their desperation had revealed the cracks in his own carefully crafted facade. A technician, a gaunt man with the haunted pallor of someone pushed to the brink, spoke up. His voice trembled, but his words held the stark pragmatism of the damned. She has a point. We salvaged an audio array from comms, a modulated pulse. It might disrupt them, buy us hours. He flinched, unable to meet the silent accusation in the eyes of a young mother clutching her fretful toddler. Elias stared at the casualty charts, the names blurring into a sea of inevitable death. Prepare the array, he rasped, the decision a crushing weight settling upon his shoulders. Personnel, those with the least ties, volunteers only. It wasn't a call to heroism, but a chilling acknowledgement of the monstrous choice laid before them. Anya felt a scream building in her throat, but her gaze fell upon the mother and child. Their shared desperation, mirrored in those wide, fearful eyes, strangled her protest. In Elias's haunted gaze, she saw a chilling recognition. He knew the terrible cost of this gamble, a sacrifice born not from hope, but the icy certainty of encroaching doom. The main shelter thrummed with a fearful energy that had replaced the grim resignation of days before. Voices echoed too loudly in the confined space, edged with a desperate tension. Elias was a spectral figure, glimpsed only in the shadows, his hardened gaze confirming their worst fears. The plan had failed, and their meager hope was extinguished. Conversations coiled like venomous serpents through the crowd. Families, once united by shared purpose, huddled together, shooting suspicious glances at their neighbors. The muffled sobs of a woman whose husband hadn't returned from the ill-fated mission were met not with comfort, but with an uncomfortable silence. An insistent whisper cut through the din. The bug lover did this. Her meddling angered them. Theron's voice, once a discordant note, now found a fearful chorus echoing his accusations. Anya, huddled near the back, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stale air. She was no longer just misguided. She was a scapegoat, a tangible target for their terror. In the dim light, she saw a flicker of something she had hoped was gone forever. The gleam of ration supplies hoarded in the corner of a family's designated space. Fear didn't breed unity, but a desperate, selfish hunger. The shared purpose of New Eden was crumbling into a brutal fight for survival where the only rule was every man for himself. Theron's gaze settled on her like a bead of sweat on a fevered brow. The shift was subtle but undeniable. He wasn't just a voice of dissent anymore. The power vacuum left by Elias's withdrawal was his to exploit. In the fearful eyes of the crowd, he no longer saw just prey to manipulate, but the beginnings of a following. Anya's hand inched towards her satchel. It held not some grand solution, but the last remnants of her reckless hope. A salvaged transmitter, hastily scribbled notes on Acti frequencies. Elias might be lost in the grip of despair, but she wasn't. Even if it branded her a traitor, even if it led to her exile, she would find a way to reach Xylo, to offer a different path than the self-destructive one they hurtled towards. The makeshift shelter was a claustrophobic warren of dimly lit tunnels and rationed air. Fear had soured into a tense silence, broken only by the relentless sonic thrum from the valley, the ragged breathing of the huddled masses. In the cramped room designated as engineering, Anya worked with trembling hands. A salvaged power coil, a few miswired connections. It looked like a desperate repair attempt, not an act of deliberate sabotage. But the flicker in her eyes, the cold sweat on her brow, told a different story. Days ago, this would have been unthinkable. Now, as she heard the muffled shouts of Theron echoing through the tunnels, as she caught the fearful glances of those who once trusted her, the lines between desperation and destruction blurred. For the good of the colony, she whispered to the empty room, the words echoing mockingly against the bare walls. Was she truly saving them, or just plunging them deeper into despair? The first flicker of the overhead lights was barely perceptible. Then another. A surge of dread washed over Anya, a stark counterpoint to the wave of hushed whispers cascading through the shelter. It was working. She stumbled back, her satchel, containing the last of her precious research, slipping from her grasp. The carefully annotated diagrams, the desperate scribbles of frequencies meant to connect, not disrupt, spilled across the floor. Footsteps, hesitant at first, then echoing with rising urgency, approached. It wasn't Elias, his weariness too profound for swift action. Maya's face appeared in the doorway, a mix of fear and dawning accusation. Dr. Petrova, her voice was barely a whisper. The lights. What have you done? There was no time for explanations, no way to plead her case. In Maya's eyes, she saw not a saboteur, but the ghost of the monster Theron painted her as. The seed of doubt, painstakingly planted, was blooming into a bitter harvest. The shouts grew louder, echoing through the tunnels as Theron's voice rose above the rest, demanding retribution. Anya was no longer just misguided. She was the enemy within, the architect of their escalating disaster. The supply room was a suffocating testament to their dwindling hope. Meager ration packs were stacked with grim precision, casting stark shadows in the flickering glow of a failing generator. Anya clutched a salvaged data pad, its precious contents her only weapon against the rising tide of suspicion. A sharp crack echoed through the cramped space. Not the ever-present sonic onslaught from the valley, but the splintering of wood. A makeshift barricade, hastily erected the night before, groaned and buckled under a surge of bodies fueled by fear. Traitor! The accusation, choked with a desperate rage, was barely recognizable as Maya's voice. Her eyes, once filled with a cautious curiosity, now mirrored Theron's venomous glare. Anya stumbled back, her fingers tightening around the data pad until it threatened to crack. It wasn't just knowledge contained within the device. It was a lifeline to the world she believed in, the fragile possibility of understanding. The first blow was a stolen ration bar striking her arm, a sharp burst of pain followed by a gasp from the crowd. A child, echoing the learned cruelty of the adults, snatched her worn stuffed rabbit, its faded eyes gleaming in the dim light. Bug lover, the child hissed, mimicking Theron's taunts, before tearing at the beloved toy. Anya lunged forward, not to protect the tattered remnants of childhood comfort, but driven by a cold fury that burned brighter than her fear. Her voice, hoarse and desperate, cut through the chaos. Fools! She wrenched the datapad free, holding it high. This is our only chance. Not this fear. Her plea was cut short as rough hands seized her, dragging her out of the dwindling light. The corridor was a blur of angry faces, accusations blurring into a cacophony of terror. She caught a glimpse of Elias, his form a slumped shadow against the wall, unable or unwilling to stem the tide of brutality. Each shove, each stolen scrap of salvaged equipment, wasn't just a punishment, but an attempt to extinguish the last flicker of hope that Anya represented. Yet, with every ragged breath, beneath the sting of bruises and the bitter taste of betrayal, a fierce defiance took root. They could break her body, tear down the symbols of her gentler world, but they could not crush her spirit. From the ashes of New Eden, a different Anya would be forged. One who understood that empathy alone wasn't enough, that survival sometimes demanded fighting back. The valley below pulsed with monstrous forms and the chilling cadence of sonic blasts. Exile wasn't a death sentence, just a delayed one. Anya stumbled, her bruised body screaming in protest with every step. The relentless throb at the edge of her hearing was a countdown to her inevitable end. Her fingers, cracked and bleeding, clutched the salvaged data pad with a desperation born of extinguished hope. It was a relic of a world that had cast her aside, proof of a dream turned to ash. A flicker of movement above drew her gaze. Not the grotesque silhouette of an Acti war machine, but something smaller, swifter. It banked, descending towards her with a grace that seemed impossibly out of place amidst the brutality of this world. She collapsed, not in surrender, but because her body simply refused to obey. The creature landed a cautious distance away, its chitinous plates gleaming with a soft iridescence, its multifaceted eyes focused on her with an unnerving intensity. A young Acti, not yet hardened by endless conflict. A surge of fear battled with an exhaustion too profound to care. Every instinct honed by months of escalating tension screamed at her to flee, to fight, to cower. But all she could manage was a ragged breath, echoing in the desolate silence. The creature tilted its head, a gesture almost mirroring her own earlier curiosity. With a hesitant, segmented limb, it nudged something towards her. Not a weapon, but a cluster of faintly glowing flora, emitting a scent not of decay, but of something Anya couldn't identify. Sustenance? It wasn't an act of grand compassion, perhaps merely an alien form of curiosity. Yet, as her trembling fingers curled around the offered sustenance, Anya felt a flicker of something she thought lost forever ignite within her. Hope, a dangerous, fragile thing, rekindled not from blind faith, but from the dissonant harmony of a desolate landscape and a simple act of unexpected mercy. Anya looked up, meeting the multifaceted eyes of her would-be executioner. They were still alien, filled with an intelligence beyond her understanding. But in that shared moment, suspended between two worlds on the precipice of destruction, she saw not a monster, but a possibility. The hidden grotto was a sanctuary born of geological anomaly. Bioluminescent flora clung to the smooth curve of the cave walls, casting an ethereal glow over the makeshift nest Anya had cobbled together. Her stolen data pad rested nearby, filled with meticulous notes and observations, a testament to the relentless determination that had replaced her initial despair. Each passing day honed her hunter-gatherer instincts, identifying edible fungi, deciphering the strange symphony of clicks and chitters that echoed through the canyons. Survival was a science project, and Anya, the ever-diligent student. Yet, the ache for her vanished world, the sting of betrayal, was a constant hum beneath the surface calm. A patter of hesitant footsteps pierced her solitude, not the heavy tread of an Acti warrior, but something lighter, uncertain. Her breath hitched. Discovery was now a more pressing threat than starvation or thirst. Crouched in the shadows, she watched as a young Acti stumbled into the grotto. It was barely more than a hatchling, its chitinous plates still soft, the iridescent sheen of its resonators muted. Its multifaceted eyes widened in alarm, but not at her. A low, pained groan echoed through the cave. Anya followed the young one's gaze, her own widening in horror. An older Acti lay nestled amidst the glowing flora, its segmented limbs twisted at unnatural angles, its resonators flickering weakly. Wounded and desperately seeking shelter, Anya's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct, every bitter lesson the colony had taught her, screamed at her to flee, to see this as an opportunity for revenge. Yet, faced with the vulnerability of the injured creature, the echoes of that shared moment of fragile connection resurfaced, a flicker of hope she thought extinguished. The distant throb of sonic blasts underscored the urgency of her predicament. Soon, warriors would descend upon this place, drawn by the silence of their comrades' resonators. Her sanctuary was about to become a battlefield. The young Acti nudged at its injured elder, a series of soft clicks echoing in the stillness. A plea for help, uttered in a language Anya yearned to decipher. It was a desperate echo of her own pleas to humanity, fallen on deaf ears. A choice lay before her, stark and unforgiving. Betray her own kind and risk the wrath of the Acti, or turn her back on this sliver of potential understanding, condemning them both. Survival was no longer enough. With a trembling hand, Anya reached for the data pad, her weapon, not against the Acti, but against the war that threatened to consume them all. The grotto was no longer a sanctuary, but a gilded cage. The young Acti had become her reluctant warden, its watchful gaze a constant reminder of her precarious existence. Yet, with each passing dawn, Anya's fear was tempered by a relentless determination. These creatures were the key, an enigma she was determined to unravel. Her meticulous observations, scribbled in the margins of salvaged data logs, were transforming into something more substantial, a rudimentary lexicon of chirps, hisses, the subtle shifting of iridescent resonators. Not just communication, but the foundations of deciphering intent. Survival was a constant dance along a razor's edge. One misstep, one misinterpreted signal, could transform her tenuous tolerance into swift execution. The fate of the injured Acti elder hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the consequences should her deception be revealed. One starless night, a change rippled through the oppressive quiet. A series of low, resonating calls she'd never documented before pierced the silence, drawing the ever-watchful young one away with urgent haste. Driven by a reckless curiosity that overrode caution, Anya followed the echoing sounds. The trail led her deeper into a labyrinthine network of tunnels, the bioluminescent flora casting an ethereal glow upon the smooth, alien walls. The calls intensified, shifting from singular to a discordant chorus of overlapping tones. Anya pressed herself against the cool stone, her heart echoing the frantic pulse beneath her ribs. The cavern ahead pulsed with a subdued luminescence, revealing a scene she never anticipated. A gathering of Acti, yet this was no war council. The resonators of the elders were dim, their forms less imposing, their agitation mirroring a desperation that mirrored her own people's recent past. A guttural cry cut through the rising tension, a sound Anya chillingly recognized as rooted in profound loss. The injured elder was gone, leaving a void that resonated through the assembled Acti. Their vulnerability, a stark contrast to the monstrous facade they projected, sent a shockwave through her. Then, a shift. One of the elders, its segmented form larger, its resonators gleaming even in the dim light, stepped forward. A familiar figure. Xylo. There was a weary dignity to her movements, a chilling echo of Elias's haunted stoicism. In that moment, the lines between enemy and victim blurred into a shared experience of suffering and impossible choices. The revelation washed over Anya. The Acti, just like humanity, were fracturing under the weight of a war they might not survive. This wasn't a bridge to cross, but a chasm to exploit, a desperate gamble where empathy was not a pathway to peace, but a weapon to be wielded in the fight for survival. Anya's makeshift cell was no longer a grotto haven, but a vantage point overlooking a battlefield of whispered accusations and dwindling hope. The colonists, once united in their fear of the alien, now turned their venomous distrust inward. Theron's whispered prophecies had become a self-fulfilling reality, each ration bar hoarded, each suspicious glance, a testament to their fragile unity crumbling from within. The rhythmic thrum of the Acti assault had become the colony's morbid metronome, yet the relentless sonic blasts remained unanswered. The attacks weren't intensifying, but shifting, probing, testing the defenses, each echo-laden with unspoken threat. Her stolen datapad was no longer a source of theoretical knowledge, but a weaponized lexicon. In the subtle modulation of frequencies, the almost imperceptible changes in resonator patterns, Anya deciphered a terrifying truth. The Acti were not brutes bent on annihilation, but master strategists toying with a cornered prey too paralyzed by fear to understand the rules of the game. Anya's warnings fell on deaf ears. Elias, a spectral figure amidst his fracturing command, saw her analysis not as a lifeline, but as further proof of her insidious sympathy for the enemy. Theron, however, watched her with a predatory gleam in his eyes, recognizing not a traitor, but a potential tool to be exploited. The next shift in the siege came not with a deafening roar, but with silence. A sliver of sunlight pierced the valley as the sonic assault ceased, replaced by a low, resonating hum that set Anya's teeth on edge. It was not a declaration of victory, but an ultimatum. The colonists emerged, hesitant and fearful, into the deceptive quiet. There were no Acti corpses littering the valley floor, no monstrous war machines poised for a final strike. Yet, the unease was thicker than ever. They had been granted a reprieve, but on terms dictated by an unseen hand. Anya watched as Theron, emboldened by desperation, approached the ridge. A crude mimicry of her own tentative gestures of communications weeks ago. An echo of her offered sustenance, there was a scavenged power coil, left as a grotesque tribute on the blood-soaked earth. She didn't need to decipher the answering throb from the valley to understand the chilling power dynamic. Survival, for the battered remnants of New Eden, now came with a monstrous price tag. Anya was their translator, not of a language, but of terror. Each concession wrung from her former people, each desperate act of appeasement, tightened the leash around her neck, all while drawing her closer to the true heart of the enemy camp. The air hummed with the discordant symphony of a world in flux. No longer the relentless sonic throb, nor the fearful whispers of a human colony, but something new, hesitant, and laden with cautious promise. The once barren valley was pockmarked with the strange, geometric structures of the Acti, interwoven with the repurposed prefabs of New Eden, neither dominant, but in a forced, uneasy coexistence. Years had etched their mark on Anya. Her hands, once fumbling with salvaged tech, now confidently dissected the chitinous armor of a young Acti warrior, explaining its vital functions to a mixed group of wide-eyed children. Humans and a select few of Xylo's faction marked by vibrant bioluminescent patterns, watched intently, fear mingling with a dawning understanding. Elias was there, no longer a commander, but a weathered collaborator, translating Anya's scientific terms into a practical language their people could grasp. Even Theron lurked in the shadows, his influence diminished, the fire in his eyes banked to a sullen resentment, yet unable to deny the necessity of this new order. A child, small hands clutching a toy unlike any Anya had ever seen. A crudely assembled fusion of salvaged tech and iridescent chitin, ran laughing through the gathered crowd. A human child? An Acti child? The distinction seemed irrelevant in their joyful abandon. Anya caught Xylo's multifaceted gaze. There was no warmth in that alien stare, but a chilling flicker of respect. They were collaborators, not friends bound together by a desperate need for this fragile experiment to succeed. Her beloved stuffed rabbit, faded and frayed beyond recognition, rested on a crudely assembled display stand nearby, a relic of the world that was lost, a stark reminder of the innocence they could never fully reclaim. As the alien sun began its descent, casting long shadows across this unlikely tableau, Anya felt a flicker not of triumph, but a weary sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, the mistrust ran deep, yet the war of annihilation had given way to a tenuous dance of survival. This was her legacy, not a paradise regained, but a testament to the relentless pursuit of understanding, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Epilogue, the child of two worlds. The makeshift schoolroom buzzed with the discordant energy of a new generation. Human children, their eyes wary yet curious, sat hunched over salvaged datapads. Intermingled amongst them were young Acti, their movements hesitant, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the strange glyphs of human learning. Anya stood at the head of this mixed classroom, her voice a steady counterpoint to the barely contained tension simmering within the cramped space. Yet, the lines etched on her face told a story of battles fought and compromises made, battles that left their mark on her just as deeply as upon the scarred valley outside. Her gaze fell upon a child seated apart from the others, older than the rest, yet caught in the limbo between playful innocence and adolescent resentment. Skin bore the textured shimmer of the Acti, but the eyes held a flicker of human warmth. A child born of both necessity and desperation, a living echo of the fragile coexistence Anya had forged. Whispers swirled around the child like a venomous wind, abomination, hybrid monster, muttered in the harsh cadence of human voices and the clicking hisses of the Acti tongue. The child's shoulders hunched, iridescent, chitinous plates trembling under the weight of a rejection that transcended species. Anya felt a familiar pang of isolation twist deep within her. She had delivered this child into a world that mirrored her own fractured existence. A world forged not from understanding, but a grim recognition of their precarious shared fate. She crossed the room, the mixed scent of antiseptic and alien musk a stark reminder of this tenuous alliance. Her touch upon the child's shoulder was gentle, a silent offering of the solace she herself rarely found. The child recoiled at first, the instinctive reaction of a creature braced for cruelty. Then, With a hesitant hope that tore at Anya's carefully cultivated composure, it leaned into her touch. As the lesson resumed, Anya watched the interplay between the children. Moments of shared discovery, tentative laughter. Yet the undercurrent of fear and distrust was a relentless tide, threatening to erode the fragile bridges she had labored to build. The future of this world, her world, was uncertain. Yet, as the outsider child, with trembling fingers, traced the glyphs of a shared language, Anya felt a flicker ignited. A defiant, fragile hope that perhaps the next generation would redefine the word belonging in a way that had forever eluded he.